Welcome back to Secret Weapons. My name is Mark Johnston. If this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for leveling up your writing, playing, and production from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a studio. If that's the kind of thing that would appeal to you, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button and stick around for future videos. Today we are taking a look at the Brothers AM by Chase Bliss and Analog Man. So first off, I kind of wish Chase Bliss would have announced this on April 1st because it's the kind of thing that seems so far-fetched for them to have done that if I wasn't physically holding one of these in my hand right now, I don't know that I would have believed they were working on it. This is the Brothers AM, and this is both a spiritual successor to the now discontinued Chase Bliss Brothers pedal, and this was both Chase Bliss's first proper foray into overdrive, as well as, to this day, one of my favorite dual drives anyone has ever made. And now that kind of broad architecture of the small format Chase Bliss dual drive is back with the Analog Man Chase Bliss collaboration, the Brothers AM. And this is what you think it is, but also a bunch of other stuff too. This is effectively a King of Tone collaboration. You have two channels of overdrive in this pedal. Each one has volume, tone, and gain with a 3-position toggle for distortion, overdrive, and boost clipping settings. For those of you familiar with the Analog Man King of Tone, which almost everybody is in some capacity, it is one of the two most famous and mythologically unobtainium overdrives in the world alongside the Klon. If you're somebody whose number ever came up in the King of Tone waiting list, you know that you were prompted to make a couple of game time decisions when speccing out your particular dual overdrive. And the number one thing was, do you do the high gain thing? And a lot of people opted for one channel of high gain and one channel of normal gain. Well, here on the Brothers AM, you have dip switches for high gain modes on both channels independently, giving you the ability to custom design your own ideal version of this circuit. With that high gain mode, switching the LED from green to red and increasing the overall amount of gain on that channel by about 25%. And the result is pretty noteworthy. Those of you who have played a King of Tone know that a lot of the kind of conventional overdrive settings within it are not so much like blow up your amp or dramatic amounts of drive, but rather tone sweetening at the bass level. Turning on one gain stage, one channel of the King of Tone, often you will have it set to just take the existing sound of your amp and embiggen it and make it more in a very, very kind of specific and pleasing way, with more aggressive tones being found in the gain staging and the pushing of that gain control itself, or in that plus 25% of gain, high gain mod available. This thing gives you access to every conceivable version of that pedal configuration, recallable by MIDI. There's a couple other interesting adjustments being made here as well. You have two hidden controls on this pedal, and they are labeled, and they are going to be the inclusion of presence control for each channel, adjusted by pressing and holding the relative channel and then turning up and down that tone knob to go from 0, which is going to be the pedal default and the sound of the original drive circuit, and then turning clockwise up to increase presence for a lot of sparkle and clarity not normally associated with this circuit. And not to be real Steve Jobs or anything right now, but there is one more thing. We're all familiar with the kind of Chase Bliss format, and we've covered a lot of it. You've got your 3-position toggles for your boost, overdrive, and distortion clipping modes. You got your gains and your tones and your volumes and your gains and your tones and your volumes and everything. We still have this switch in the middle, and that is a Treble Booster circuit, ganged to channel 1. So in the middle position, you have just the two channels of overdrive operating as intended. But if you have channel 1 engaged, you have the option of clicking over into two different flavors of Treble Booster. On the right position is going to be a more conventional Rangemaster style Treble Booster, and on the left position is going to be a more bespoke Analog Man 1, more in the flavor and the vein of like the Beano Boost. Which means at the end of everything, you kind of have a shockingly robust piece of gear here. It can do the conventional your tone but more sound. It can do the stacked gain staging overdrives, the more raucous high gain modes, and it can do this treble booster into King of Tone channel, kind of ripping nasal lead tone thing with additional presence controls, with the ability to link the presence controls together with dip switches, and with the ability to make that volume 2 your kind of global master volume for the entire pedal, which I guess only leaves one question left. Do these pedals sound the same? Does the Brothers AM sound just like the King of Tone? So here's the thing. I'm not going to answer that question. I know, I'm sorry, that was a dick move, but I'm not going to. But at the end of this video, and we have timestamps down below in case you're feeling impatient, I am going to put these in series and compare and contrast as best I can identical settings on both drives to see how close they get to one another. Because it is objectively true that between the MIDI and the additional functions and everything else on this is a more versatile and a more flexible, a wider range of tonal palettes to choose from. But if you are buying this thinking you're getting a King of Tone, I do think that you should have the opportunity to hear it next to the King of Tone itself. And I'm not going to comment on my findings on that. I just finished tracking those sound samples, so I heard them in the room, but I haven't listened back with the mic'd up amp setup that I have, so I haven't heard it in the DAW yet. And my recommendation to you when you get to that part of the video is scroll away from the video, leave the audio running, and let your ears try to work out what is what and how much of a difference you hear between the two circuits. Don't just rely on your eyes to tell you what is good. Let your ears tell you what's good, because I think it's a more honest way of looking at it. So let's get into our sound samples. Let's really put the Brothers AM through its paces before I stick this back on a board immediately, because spoiler alert, this has been on the last like 4 videos on this channel and I just haven't talked about it because this thing sounds really goddamn good. So as always, before getting to our sound samples, let's talk through our signal chain and the context we were working in. I am playing my Fender Eric Johnson Strat into the Chase Bliss Brothers AM into our amplifier, which is a Benson Monarch Plus. We are recording with a Royer 121 and an SM57 running through a pair of Warm Audio WA273 preamps. This is our clean tone. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual drive circuit contained in both channels here. We're going to live entirely in channel 1 for these sound samples because they are effectively the same channel on both sides, save for the inclusion of that treble booster on channel 1. We will bring in channel 2 when it comes time to start gain staging and stacking the two drives. So we have tone and gain at noon and a little bit of a boost to keep volume at unity. We're going to start in overdrive mode and then drop down to that boost and then step up to that distortion mode. Let's give it a listen. Before we move on to the boost and overdrive clipping options, let's take a look at the other secondary control for this tone control. It is the only and labeled secondary control on the Brothers AM, and it is the inclusion of an additional presence control for each channel. To adjust it, all you do is press and hold the corresponding channel and adjust the presence control. By default and in line with the sound of the original King of Tone, presence begins at 0, but can kind of be added onto your tone for more sparkle and more chime. So the boost and distortion channels are an interesting gain staging affair on the Brothers AM, because I think that when I think boost, overdrive, and distortion, I think less, medium, and more. But in actuality here, what you have is more clipping and therefore less headroom and more compression as you stack upwards. So your overdrive sound is going to be the kind of middle of the road, what we've been using so far. But stepping to the boost side is going to result in less distortion and less clipping in the circuit, but as a result, more headroom and more volume and a little bit more clarity. And then as you move to that distortion circuit, you're going to get less headroom, less clarity, but more internal clipping. So let's kind of dial up a nice medium crunch and give those a listen. As you can hear, the actual amount of quote-unquote conventional gain does not feel that different. It really isn't stepping up the amount of gain in the pedal that much. It is just kind of reducing headroom from mode to mode, giving you a very small Venn diagram that you can kind of choose between, but that does have larger implications when it comes to the stacking side of the Brothers AM. Being able to take the first channel and put it in boost mode, for example, might give you a stronger punch hitting channel 2, especially if you have it in overdrive or distortion, allowing you to drive that first channel more aggressively into the second. We'll take a look at that when we start stacking gain. Let's go ahead and start flipping some dip switches. Up on top of the pedal, you have a variety of controls, including presence link and a bunch of other stuff for expression control. But what we want to take a look at right now is setting back into that middle overdrive sound, resetting the pedal back to kind of a pretty neutral, classic King of Tone style drive sound. And let's go ahead and on demand pull up what is typically a really, really high value decision being made when ordering something like the original King of Tone, whether or not you want that red mode or that high gain mod. So on top, you have dip switches for high gain mode on a channel by channel basis. And by flipping one of these dip switches, you will see that our green LED has turned red. The other one will still be green right now because it is not in high gain mode. But let's go ahead and give a listen to that 25% increase in gain in the pedal. As you can hear right off the grip, there is a ton more gain on tap, and even in boost mode, lower settings, you're still going to get way more kind of crunch in the conventional sense. You still have access to, of course, your more touch responsive stuff at lower gain stages like you do. But it is a lot harder to coax out those proper clean tones like you get in normal mode. But when it comes to setting up this pedal for stacking and gain staging, that high gain mode's awesome. So stepping out of high gain mode, let's go ahead and take a look at the one final piece of the puzzle before we get into dual gain staging. Let's go ahead and take a look at this boost circuit in the dead center of the pedal. This is going to activate a treble booster style circuit. On the left side is going to be a more kind of bespoke analog man style treble booster in the vein of like a Beano boost, and on the right side is going to be more of a classic Rangemaster treble booster. Either way, this is married to this first drive circuit right here, and so we'll disengage and engage with that channel only. So be aware of that, although you can engage and disengage it with presets and with MIDI controls, of course. So let's go ahead and give a listen to our kind of normal gain stage sound, and then we'll introduce that Rangemaster circuit. The more analog man side of it. So let's spend a little bit of time taking a look at the gain staging in this thing. We're going to start with both channels on green mode, and then we'll start to kind of turn on and off the high gain for each side, as well as make some adjustments to the clipping modes they are each on. It is worth noting that when both channels are engaged, volume 2 is kind of your master output, overall output for the pedal. And so when you disengage that, you will get volume changes. You can adjust that by turning on a linked master volume control up top. Let's go ahead and close things out with an A-Bing of the two pedals. I'm going to get off mic for the remainder of this video. I am not going to comment on what I am hearing, and honestly, I'm not going to blur the video or cover up the foot switches or anything, but I would recommend going ahead and either minimizing the screen or just scrolling away from the actual video and just seeing where you hear differences and trying to kind of allow those differences to be informed by what you're hearing more than what you're seeing. I've done really light A-Bing of these, but I wanted to kind of go into this portion of the video as blind as possible. So I've heard them side by side to the extent that I could figure out what each of the channels on Ryan's King of Tone were so that I could then kind of get the approximate settings on here on the Brothers. But we're going to go ahead and just go ahead and A-B them out and see how they each strike me. So let's go ahead and wrap things up like that.